When it comes to Fat Ass 45, he doesn't really have any accomplishments, but he does have a lot of failures. Um, but he's trying to fight for re-election, and obviously he's losing that battle. The Fat Ass 45 has been among the most controversial squatters in U.S. history, and just the third person to be impeached in office. Fat Ass 45's disastrous handling of the COVID-19 pandemic hangs heavily over the upcoming presidential election. The polling shows that Fat Ass 45 is trailing former Vice President Joe Biden in national polls. Um, Even though he has very little accomplishments, they're not popular with his critics, and Fat Ass 45, for better or worse, has been a consequential squatter thus far. At the same time, Fat Ass 45's tenure has seen major failures that have exacerbated problems at home and abroad, particularly when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic. Fat Ass 45's handling of the COVID-19 will go down as one of the worst disasters in U.S. history, with nearly 200,000 already dead and millions of people unemployed. So with Fat Ass 45 entering an election year as just the third person to be impeached, even though even though the Republicans acquitted Fat Ass 45, technically he was still guilty and impeached, and the trial would soon become a distant memory amid a pandemic that's killed thousands of Americans and left millions of people unemployed. Though he's been perhaps the most controversial and divisive fat ass in modern U.S. history, Fat Ass 45 has a remarkably steady approval rating due to his staunchly loyal and bred supporters. Even as polling has repeatedly shown that most Americans disapprove of the Fat Ass's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, his overall approval rating has barely fluctuated. Yeah, it's only like 40-something%, so yeah. With that being said, Fat Ass 45 is trailing former Vice President Joe Biden in the polls, and as he faces a tough road to Election Day. Here are 45's biggest, only two accomplishments and five failures as Fat Ass so far, measured by their overall impact and taking into account the general response from Congress, the public, and wider world. One of the first accomplishments was reshaping the federal judiciary. Um, Fat Ass 45's most lasting impact in the country will be the reshaping of the federal judiciary. Thus far, Fat Ass 45 has installed two Supreme Court justices and 205 judges overall to the federal bench, all for lifetime appointments. By December, Fat Ass 45's nominees made up roughly 25% of all the U.S. Circuit Court judges, according to an analyst by the Washington Post. He's appointed 53 judges on the 13 U.S. Circuit Courts, and still has only months left in his first term. To put this into perspective, former President Barack Obama only appointed 55 judges in two terms in his 2 terms in the White House. The courts get the final say in U.S. politics, setting precedents that can shape the country for years to come. Even if Fat Ass 45 is not re-elected in 2020, his failed squadrency will continue to have an impact on the direction of the U.S. due to the sheer number of conservative judges he's installed. Let's see what the other one is the tax reform, which I wouldn't really consider an accomplishment. 3 years into his failed presidency, Fat Ass 45's signature legislative achievement remains a Republican tax bill that made sweeping changes to the tax code, the Tax Cut for the Rich Jobs Act. As Business Insider's Joseph Zabalos Roy recently reported, the law was the biggest overhaul to the nation's tax code in 3 decades, and the Fat Ass has pitched it as a rocket fuel for the American economy. It permanently slashed the corporate tax rate to 21% from 35%, while also providing temporary benefits from individuals and their families. Critics argued that it was a windfall for massive corporations at the expense of the middle class. Meanwhile, supporters of the tax cuts contended it would unleash an economic bonanza. Businesses would invest in their operations, they said, resulting in improved worker productivity and higher wages. Treasury Secretary Steve Dumbass Mnuchin, among others, said that the law would juice the nation's gross domestic product to 3% or more, as Fat Ass 45 said 6%, and soon pay for itself and spread prosperity. But the law has achieved none of the ambitious goals that Republicans put forward, and there are scant signs that they ever will. Hold on a second here. Now we go to his failures. Failure: Charlottesville and George Floyd. Um, Fat Ass 45's response to a deadly neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, remains one of the most controversial moments in his failed presidency. It was emblematic of Fat Ass 45's struggle to bring the country together after tragedies, and more generally, his response also typified his controversial record on race relations and white supremacy. Fat Ass 45 blamed many sides for the violence of the rally, which resulted in the death of a counter-protester, Heather Heyer. He later said that there were very fine people on both sides. The fat ass was excoriated by Republicans and Democrats alike over his response and his failure to offer a swift and forceful condemnation of white supremacist violence. The GOP Senator Lapdog Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, often one of Fat Ass 45's fiercest nutlickers in Congress at the time, said the fat ass's words were dividing Americans, not healing them. Fat Ass 45 took a step backward by again suggesting that there was more equivalency between the white supremacist neo-Nazis and KKK members. In the wake of the brutal death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police and the nationwide protest that followed, Fat Ass 45 also failed to rise to the occasion. He's done far more to divide the country than bring it together. The fat ass had peaceful protesters tear gassed near the White House so he could pose for a photo with a Bible at a nearby church. He's consistently demonized anti-racism demonstrators and controversially sent federal agents into the U.S. cities to squash unrest and intimidate the local population. Fat Ass 45 has elevated conspiracy theorists and people who threaten protesters with guns. Historians have warned that Fat Ass 45's tactics mirror these of authoritarian regimes. Fat Ass 45 has frequently employed racist rhetoric during his failed presidency, but especially during times of heightened racial tensions. The polling shows that the vast majority of black Americans believe that Fat Ass 45 is a racist, and his approval rating but this demographic stands at 8% according to Gallup. A second failure, America's global image in shambles. America's global image has declined significantly under Fat Ass 45, who has repeatedly insulted key U.S. allies while cozying up to dictators. The Fat Ass's tendency to push important allies away and isolate the U.S., including by pulling out of landmark international agreements like the Paris Climate Accord, has had a palpable impact. People across the world have expressed negative views on Fat Ass 45. Pew Research Center in January of 2020 released a survey of 32 countries that showed a median of only 64% said that they do not have confidence in Fat Ass 45 at all to do the right thing in world affairs, and only 29% expressed confidence in the Fat Ass. Fat Ass 45's handling of the coronavirus pandemic has also left the U.S. embarrassed on the world stage, and basically created a void in global leadership that China has rushed to fill. His third failure, family separations and the death of immigrant children. Fat Ass 45 in 2016 campaigned on reducing undocumented immigration, pledging to take a hardline approach. He made good on that promise when coming into office, but has been accused of human rights abuse and violated international law by the UN. Fat Ass 45's administration, some zero-tolerance policy on illegal border crossings, led to the separations of at least 5,500 families and saw children placed in cages. The fat ass of the American Academy of Pediatrics at the time described the practice as nothing less than government-sanctioned child abuse. After widespread backlash, Fat Ass 45 issued an executive order in June of 2018 to halt the family separations, and a federal judge ordered the Fat Ass 45 administration to reunite all those who had been separated, but the fallout from the separations is still ongoing. Fat Ass 45 has falsely blamed his predecessor, former President Barack Obama, for the policy that saw thousands of children separated from their parents. Meanwhile, at least 6 immigrant children have died in U.S. custody since September of 2018, leading to a widespread condemnation of conditions in detention facilities. The UN Human Rights Chief, Michelle Bachelet, in July said she was shocked by the U.S. government's treatment of migrant children and the conditions they faced in detention facilities after crossing the border from Mexico. As a pediatrician, but also a mother and a former head of state, she was deeply shocked that children are forced to sleep on the floor in overcrowded facilities without access to adequate health care or food and with poor sanitation conditions, Bachelet, the former president of Chile, had stated. Failure. His fourth failure is Iran, Syria, and Afghanistan. Fat Ass 45's decision to unilaterally withdrawal the U.S. from the 2015 nuclear deal in May of 2018 has induced chaos throughout the Middle East. It remains one of Fat Ass 45's most unpopular decisions in the global arena, and has been condemned by the U.S. allies who were signatories to the deal. The fat ass has failed to thwart Iran's aggressive behavior in the region via a maximum pressure campaign, which is meant to squeeze Tehran into negotiating a more stringent version of the pact. After a series of incidents in the Persian Gulf region in 2019, tensions between Washington and Tehran had reached historic heights and sparked fears of war. This fear was exacerbated after Fatah 45 ordered a strike that killed Iran's top general Qassem Soleimani in early January. The strike had led Iran to retaliate and fire on U.S. troops in the region, and dozens were seriously injured. Iran had essentially abandoned the 2015 nuclear deal, which was designed to prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Badass 45's decision to pull U.S. troops out of northern Syria in October is also among his most disastrous foreign policy move. In doing so, Badass 45 effectively abandoned the U.S. allied Kurdish foes, the force who bore the brunt of the U.S.-led campaign against ISIS to a Turkish military invasion. The withdrawal induced a humanitarian crisis and created a security vacuum that Russia, Iran, and Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, an accused war criminal, all benefited from. Badass 45 has repeatedly pledged to end endless wars, zeroing in on Afghanistan. He wanted to remove all U.S. troops from Afghanistan by the November election, but that hasn't happened with Election Day coming up less than 2 months away. The U.S. is engaged in ongoing but tenuous peace talks with the Taliban that have occurred in concert with ongoing violence in the country. Meanwhile, the New York Times in June reported that U.S. intelligence officials has determined that Russia has paid bounties to Taliban-linked Afghan militants to kill U.S. troops. The Fat-Ass 45 administration has taken no responses whatsoever on this, though the White House has claimed that Fat-Ass 45 was not additionally briefed on the matter. I think he was, reporting from multiple outlets suggesting otherwise. Fat-Ass 45 in a recent interview said he has not confronted Russian President Vladimir Putin on the matter. Another failure, replacing the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. The late Senator John McCain's iconic thumbs down vote denied. Hold on. Okay, the late Senator John McCain's iconic thumbs down vote denied Badass 45 a full congressional repeal, even a skinny repeal of former President Barack Obama's signature health care law. However, Badass 45 has had success in dismantling parts of the law. His tax bill included a rollback of the tax penalty for those who do not enroll in health care, and the Badass 45's administration has had some success in the courts regarding the individual mandate. Earlier in December, a federal appeals court struck down a core part of the law. The individual mandated did not overturn the entire law, sending it back to a lower court and leaving the fate of the Obamacare uncertain as an election year focused on health care intensifies. What Fat-Ass 45 has not done in his first 3 years is offer a replacement for the Affordable Care Act. As the Associated Press points out, as a candidate, Fat-Ass 45 promised insurance for everybody and a more immediate replacement to the nearly decade-old Affordable Care Act. The fat ass said that he would introduce a phenomenal health care plan during an interview with ABC News in June. Failure was his last failure. This I think might be his fifth one, impeachment. Fat Ass 45 was impeached in the House of Representatives on December 18th. The House approved 2 articles of impeachment against Fat Ass 45, one for the abuse of power over his dealings with Ukraine, and one for obstruction of Congress over his efforts to stonewall the impeachment inquiry. Fat Ass 45 urged Ukraine to launch investigations into his political rivals, as he simultaneously withheld about $400 million in congressionally approved military aid from the country, which is fighting an ongoing war against pro-Russian separatists. The fat ass was acquitted by the Senate trial, but will still go down just as the third badass in U.S. history to impeach. GOP Senator Mitt Romney of Utah also made history by voting to convict Fat Ass 45, marking the first time ever that a senator voted to convict a president from their own party. Also, his last failure, COVID-19. Fat Ass 45's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic will likely go down as one of the biggest disasters in U.S. history, as hundreds of thousands of Americans have died and millions are unemployed. The U.S. has the worst coronavirus outbreak in the world, with over 6.3 million confirmed cases and nearly 200,000 people dead. The U.S. has had more coronavirus cases than the populations of many countries, and more Americans have died from the virus than the number of U.S. soldiers killed in combat every war counted if we go back from 1945. The Badass 45 has repeatedly downplayed the threat of the virus and contradicted top health public health experts, flouting recommendations from advisors on his own White House coronavirus task force. In March, Badass 45 privately admitted to veteran reporter Bob Woodward on tape that he deliberately misled the public on the dangers of the virus in an effort to avoid inducing panic. Public health experts have cited Badass 45's nonchalant approach to the virus and tendency to reject science as one of the primary factors in why the U.S. has emerged as the epicenter. Badass 45 has refused to accept responsibility for his failed response to the pandemic, instead putting the blame on China. Yeah, so that's it right there. But he's had more failures and accomplishments, and really, I wouldn't consider the tax cut even an accomplishment.